You've never once actually felt yourself move. You sit there perfectly still, trusting the solid ground beneath your feet, fully believing you are safely anchored to a calm and stable world. But that profound sense of stillness is a terrifying illusion. Right now, a brutal and invisible tether is violently yanking the very ground you stand on toward the freezing dark of the night sky, dragging entire oceans and warping massive continents along with it. You're caught in a relentless cosmic tug-of-war that dictates the length of your days and the rhythm of your seasons. The planet you call home is constantly being stretched and distorted, yet your senses completely lie to you, making you feel absolutely nothing. The invisible force constantly stretching the Earth originates from a massive desolate rock hanging nearly 384,000 kilometers above our fragile world. For thousands of years, humanity has looked up at that glowing pale sphere in the freezing darkness, writing countless myths about its serene beauty and fiercely dreaming of one day building thriving, futuristic cities on its cratered surface. We intuitively view our closest cosmic neighbor as a silent, peaceful sanctuary, an untouched frontier just waiting to be confidently colonized by future generations of explorers. But that highly romanticized vision is a profound, deeply flawed, and incredibly dangerous misconception born entirely from our safe distance. And today you'll find out what the moon really is, and why living on it is a physiological death trap. If you love wandering through the night sky, subscribe to the channel. That's what keeps this work going. Before we set off, one question for you. Where in the world are you watching the sky from, and what time is it where you are? Let us know down in the comments below. Let's step into the absolute void. To truly understand the deadly reality of this floating world, we first have to look back at how we were completely blinded by our own ancient illusions. For thousands of years, humanity looked up at the night sky and saw a flawless divine masterpiece. The dominating dogma of ancient Greek philosophy, particularly driven by Aristotle, declared that the heavens were perfect and entirely unchangeable. The moon was widely believed to be a perfectly smooth, unblemished crystal sphere that radiated its own pure, ethereal light. It was the ultimate symbol of peace. You would look up from the chaotic, muddy, and unpredictable Earth, and you would see this immaculate beacon of tranquility. There was absolutely no debate allowed. The greatest minds of antiquity agreed on this pristine vision, and for centuries the mechanics of the night sky were considered a closed book. Everything was completely solved, securely locked away in the comforting thought that the universe above was a safe, perfectly ordered sanctuary. But you can't hide the brutal physics of the cosmos forever. The first massive crack in this comforting dogma didn't happen with a telescope. It happened in the 11th century through the brilliant mind of an Islamic Golden Age scholar named Ibn al-Haytham. He refused to accept the ancient assumption that the moon was a glowing crystal. To prove it, he didn't even look at the sky. He locked himself inside a completely dark room, a camera obscura. A camera obscura is simply a darkened space with a tiny hole in one wall that lets a single beam of light pass through, projecting the outside image onto the opposite wall. Here, in the absolute darkness, the truth violently shifts into focus. He observes how light actually travels. He proves through rigorous geometry that light moves in perfectly straight lines. If the moon were a smooth, polished crystal sphere, it would reflect the sun's light like a mirror, creating a single, blindingly bright spot on its surface. Imagine shining a flashlight directly into a bathroom mirror. You see a harsh, concentrated glare, not a softly glowing surface. Instead, the moon's light is scattered evenly. Ibn al-Haytham mathematically demonstrates that this even glow can only happen if the surface is rough, jagged, and broken. It isn't a magical, self-illuminating crystal at all. It is a massive, battered rock reflecting light wildly in every direction. The pristine illusion is shattered, yet humanity desperately clung to the idea of a peaceful moon. By the 19th century, astronomers were pointing increasingly powerful telescopes at the lunar surface. They saw the jagged edges, the massive dark plains, and most importantly, the millions of circular pits dotting the landscape. But instead of seeing violence, they saw a familiar earthly process. The new dogma quickly settled in. Those massive holes were simply dead volcanoes. They looked exactly like the volcanic calderas you might find in Hawaii or Italy. The scientific consensus proudly declared that the moon was just a smaller, geologically dead version of Earth. It had a fiery past, sure, but now it was a silent, frozen museum. Once again, the textbooks were confidently closed. Everything was solved. You didn't need to worry about the sky falling because those scars were just ancient internal hiccups of a dead world. This comfortable lie survived all the way until the 1960s. Enter Gene Shoemaker, a brilliant geologist working for the United States Geological Survey. Shoemaker looked at those massive lunar craters and saw something deeply unsettling. He realized that the volcanic theory was mathematically and physically impossible. The craters were too perfectly round, their rims were too violently uplifted, and their distribution made absolutely no geological sense. Shoemaker knew that to understand the moon, he had to look at the most violent events on Earth. He traveled to the Barringer crater in Arizona and studied the craters left behind by underground nuclear weapons tests. What he finds there changes our understanding of the solar system forever. He steps down into the crushed rocks and discovers a microscopic fingerprint of unimaginable violence. When he finds coesite. Coesite is a highly dense fractured form of quartz that can only be created under brief, incredibly extreme pressure. You can't make it in a slow, bubbling volcano. Imagine putting a lump of coal inside a heavy hydraulic press and violently slamming it down in a fraction of a second. That sudden, massive shock is the only way to forge this specific mineral. Shoemaker proves that the scars on the moon are not peaceful volcanic vents. They are ballistic impact craters. They are the devastating results of massive asteroids slamming into the surface at hypersonic speeds. Let's put you in the exact center of one of those events. An asteroid the size of a mountain is hurtling through the vacuum of space at over 70,000 kilometers per hour. There is no atmosphere to slow it down, no air to burn it up, and absolutely no sound to warn you it is coming. It strikes the lunar surface in total silence. In that exact fraction of a second, the kinetic energy transferred to the ground is greater than millions of nuclear bombs detonating simultaneously. The solid rock behaves like a liquid. It instantly vaporizes, sending a blinding flash of radiation out into the void. The ground violently ripples outward. The shockwave crushes the bedrock, instantly transforming ordinary sand into fractured coesite. Millions of tons of shattered debris are violently ejected upward, raining back down across the desolate plains. What 19th century astronomers confidently thought were quiet, sleepy volcanoes were actually ground zero for apocalyptic cosmic collisions. The moon isn't a peaceful dead world. It is a battered shield, a cosmic punching bag that has been absorbing catastrophic hits for billions of years, so that our fragile planet doesn't have to. Every single crater you see when you look up is a monument to a world-ending impact. Shoemaker's relentless dedication completely rewrote the textbooks, forcing us to finally accept the incredibly violent nature of our celestial neighborhood. The comforting illusion of a safe, predictable universe was gone forever. We realize that the silent rock hanging above us is essentially an active crime scene, preserving the evidence of an incredibly hostile and merciless environment. But the craters were only the most obvious visible scars. The true danger of this environment wasn't just in the massive rocks falling from the sky. It was in the microscopic aftermath left behind by those very impacts. And yet, the most terrifying threat to human life on the moon isn't the giant craters. That specific threat only makes sense once you fully understand the brutal physical reality of lunar dust. To grasp exactly what the astronauts faced, we need to go back to 1972 during the Apollo 17 mission. Picture the cramped, highly pressurized interior of the lunar module. Geologist Harrison Schmitt and Commander Eugene Cernan have just returned from a long, exhausting spacewalk. They cycle the airlock, wait for the pressure to equalize, and finally pull off their heavy, airtight helmets. The very first thing they notice is an overpowering acrid smell filling the tiny cabin. They describe it as the sharp metallic stench of spent gunpowder after a rifle has just been fired, but the smell is quickly overshadowed by a violent physical reaction. Schmidt begins to violently cough. His throat burns relentlessly, his eyes water uncontrollably, and his sinuses become severely inflamed. He is experiencing the very first documented extraterrestrial allergic reaction, a condition he immediately dubs lunar hay fever. The culprit is smeared all over their supposedly pristine white spacesuits. The brilliant white fabric is completely coated in a thick, dark grey grime that clings to the material with an impossible, almost magnetic grip. The astronauts desperately grab stiff brushes specifically designed to clean the suits and aggressively scrub the fabric. But the friction only makes it worse. The more they wipe, the deeper the grime grinds into the highly engineered woven fibers of the suits. The dust is actively fighting back. It chemically and mechanically degrades the airtight rubber seals locking their helmets to their suits, creating a terrifying risk of depressurization. After just 3 days of walking on the surface, the multi-million-dollar spacesuits are nearly destroyed, worn down to the critical underlying pressure bladders. If the mission had lasted a week longer, the suits might have completely failed, exposing the men to the vacuum of space. This terrifying physical encounter forces scientists to completely rethink the lunar surface. When the Apollo missions finally return to Earth, researchers take these vacuum-sealed samples and carefully place them under the merciless lens of a scanning electron microscope. The physical setup is crucial here. An electron microscope doesn't use normal light or traditional glass lenses. Instead, it fires a highly concentrated high-voltage beam of electrons inside a perfect vacuum chamber, directly at the tiny specks of dirt. As the electrons strike the sample, they bounce off the atomic contours of the dust, and specialized detectors translate those bouncing electrons into a hyper-detailed, three-dimensional topographical map on a monitor. By doing this, they completely bypass the physical limits of optical light and can finally see the true microscopic architecture of the lunar soil, mathematically known as regolith. What slowly renders on the monitor sends a sudden shockwave through the engineering teams. On Earth, if you go to a beach and look at a handful of sand under a microscope, you will see tiny, smooth, rounded pebbles. They have been gently polished for millions of years by the relentless friction of wind and flowing water. But the Moon has absolutely no wind, no flowing rivers, and no weather of any kind to smooth things out. Instead, the Moon has impact gardening. For billions of years, tiny micrometeorites traveling at hypersonic speeds have been violently slamming into the surface. These microscopic impacts generate brief, intense flashes of heat that instantly melt the rock. Because there is no atmosphere to hold the heat, that liquid rock freezes back into a solid in a fraction of a second. Under the electron microscope, lunar dust doesn't look like sand at all. No, it looks like billions of microscopic shattered razor blades and jagged fishhooks made of porous glass. Imagine taking a fragile glass Christmas ornament, smashing it with a heavy steel hammer, and then zooming in on the sharpest, most jagged microscopic fragments. That is exactly what the Apollo astronauts were breathing in. Because the Moon lacks a protective global magnetic field, the constant bombardment of solar radiation heavily electrifies these tiny glass shards. They become highly charged with static electricity, causing them to aggressively cling to absolutely everything they touch. This profound discovery solves the immediate mystery of Schmidt's burning lungs. He was unknowingly inhaling microscopic shards of shattered glass that were physically cutting into his delicate alveolar tissues. If an astronaut were exposed to this hostile environment for months instead of mere days, the microscopic hooks would permanently lodge deep inside their respiratory system. This would inevitably lead to a fatal, currently incurable condition, similar to the brutal silicosis suffered by deep-shaft coal miners. The immediate crisis of the coughing was solved, but this newly revealed physical reality birthed a massive, ongoing engineering nightmare. If the dust acts like electrostatically charged sandpaper, how can you possibly keep a lunar base functioning? It works its way into the moving joints of electric rovers, acting as a destructive abrasive that literally tears metal gears apart from the inside out. This isn't just a theoretical problem, it is an active, ongoing crisis that slowly blinds our most robust scientific instruments. To see this mechanical destruction happening in real time, we need to look at an elegant experiment run by Tom Murphy and his team at the University of California, San Diego, in 2010. The physical setup for this experiment is a masterpiece of precision engineering involving the lunar laser-ranging retroreflectors. Decades ago, the Apollo astronauts left small aluminum panels on the lunar surface equipped with highly specialized, fused silica corner cube prisms. These prisms are geometrically designed with 3 precisely angled mirrors to catch any incoming light and reflect it perfectly straight back to the source, no matter what angle the light arrives from. For decades, astronomers on Earth have used massive telescopes to fire incredibly powerful, pulsed green laser beams directly at these distant panels. We are talking about firing quadrillions of photons into the dark sky, aiming at a target the size of a suitcase nearly 400,000 kilometers away. By capturing the few stray photons that make the round trip and measuring the exact time it takes for them to travel to the moon and bounce back, they can calculate the distance to the moon with absolute millimeter precision. For years, the experiment worked flawlessly, catching a steady, predictable stream of returning photons. But as the decades passed, the team noticed a terrifying operational trend. The amount of light bouncing back during the full moon phase was suddenly dropping by a massive factor of 10. The mirrors were going blind. The research team ran extensive thermodynamic simulations to figure out exactly what was happening on the surface. The conclusion they reached was a brilliant piece of mechanical deduction. The highly charged, jagged lunar dust had slowly levitated off the ground and completely coated the pristine glass prisms. When the intense, unfiltered sunlight of the full moon hits that dark, heat-absorbing dust, the surface of the mirror rapidly heats up. This intense heat creates a thermal lens effect inside the glass itself. Imagine looking through a thick window right above a hot radiator. The rising heat waves warp and bend the light passing through it. The hot dust warps the precise geometry of the prisms, causing the returning laser beam to wildly scatter into the void of space instead of cleanly returning to Earth. The experiment mathematically proved that the lunar environment actively fights against anything we place there. The dust is a relentless mechanical cancer that degrades our optics, destroys our rubber seals, and threatens to slowly suffocate any human being who dares to stay too long. The crisis of the dust unequivocally proved that the moon's surface is fundamentally incompatible with long-term human survival. It showed us that building a sustainable habitat isn't just about carrying enough oxygen and water. It's about somehow surviving an invisible storm of charged glass that aggressively wants to tear your machinery and your lungs apart. But understanding the true nature of the dust raised an even more troubling puzzle about the very ground beneath it. The biggest misconception about the lunar ground is thinking it acts as a stable, predictable foundation. We inherently trust the Earth beneath our feet. We assume that if we can just build a strong enough structure, the ground will peacefully support it. But the moon's anatomy is actively designed to mechanically tear any human habitat to shreds, starting with the most basic element of a planetary day, the sunrise. On Earth, sunrise is a gentle, gradual process. The thick atmosphere diffuses the light, slowly warming the air and the soil over several hours. But the moon has absolutely no atmosphere to buffer the transition. Instead, it has a brutal moving boundary called the terminator line. This is the razor-sharp division between absolute darkness and blinding sunlight that slowly crawls across the lunar surface. If you were standing directly on the terminator line, your right foot could be baking in sunlight, while your left foot remained frozen in the pitch-black shadow. Or, as that line passes over the ground, the temperature violently swings. Within moments, the surface temperature rockets from minus 130 degrees Celsius in the dark to a blistering plus 120 degrees Celsius in the direct sunlight. This isn't just uncomfortable, it is a catastrophic mechanical nightmare known as thermal shock. All materials expand when heated and contract when cooled. On Earth, this happens slowly. On the Moon, the instantaneous 250-degree swing causes the very bedrock to violently expand and contract. The rocks literally groan and crack under the immense thermal stress. Now imagine a highly pressurized human habitat built on that exact surface. As the Terminator line washes over the metal structure, one half of the building rapidly expands while the other half rigidly contracts in the deep freeze. The immense shearing forces acting on the bolts, the structural joints, and the airtight rubber seals are incredibly destructive. You're trapped inside a fragile pressure vessel that the environment is actively trying to twist and rip open every single time the sun rises or sets. The relentless thermal fatigue guarantees that any traditional structure we build will eventually fail, exposing the interior to the most terrifying aspect of the lunar anatomy, the absolute vacuum. During the Apollo missions, the astronauts actually experienced this thermal horror firsthand. The engineers had to design the lunar rover with specialized thermal radiators specifically to dump the excess heat into space. When the astronauts were walking, the intense direct sunlight would heat the outside of their suits to over 100 degrees Celsius. To counter this, an internal cooling system pumped ice water through a network of tubes just to prevent a fatal heat stroke. If that tiny water pump failed, they would be cooked alive inside their own suits within minutes. It is a deeply claustrophobic reality. Every second you spend outside, you're engaged in a desperate high-stakes battle against the extreme temperature gradient. Because the Moon lacks any meaningful atmosphere, it exists in a state of hard vacuum. This isn't just about not having oxygen to breathe, it is about the fundamental physics of fluid dynamics and air pressure. We evolved at the bottom of a massive ocean of air, perfectly adapted to a pressure of 1 atmosphere. When you step onto the lunar surface, that pressure drops to a hard, unforgiving 0. The complete absence of air means there is no sound. You could be standing 3 feet away from a massive explosive detonation, and you wouldn't hear a single thing. The silence is absolute, heavy, and deeply isolating. The only sounds you will ever hear are the mechanical hum of your suit's life support fans and the sound of your own frantic breathing echoing inside your helmet. On Earth, the heavy weight of the atmosphere physically presses down on your body, keeping the water inside your tissues, your blood, and your lungs in a stable liquid state. In physics, there is a critical threshold known as the Armstrong limit. This is the exact altitude where the atmospheric pressure drops so low that water will spontaneously boil at the normal temperature of the human body, 37 degrees Celsius. The lunar surface sits far, far beyond the Armstrong limit. If the thermal shock or the microscopic dust compromises the integrity of your spacesuit or your habitat, the consequences are immediate and horrific. If you suffer a rapid depressurization, you don't just hold your breath and slowly suffocate like in the movies. The sudden, violent absence of pressure causes the water in your saliva, your eyes, and the soft tissues of your lungs to instantly vaporize and violently boil. The rapidly expanding gases would physically rupture your delicate lung tissues in seconds. You're constantly surrounded by an invisible, silent void that is desperately trying to rip the gases out of your blood. The true claustrophobia of living on the Moon comes from the absolute realization that your entire existence, your deeply fragile biology, depends entirely on a millimeter-thin layer of synthetic fabric and rubber seals. You're forever isolated in a mechanical bubble, surrounded by an environment that will instantly boil your bodily fluids the exact moment you make a single engineering mistake. But perhaps the most unnerving part of this environment is that you can't even trust the ground to sit still while you fight the vacuum. For centuries, we confidently believed the Moon was a geologically dead rock, completely silent and perfectly still. That comforting illusion was completely shattered by the Apollo missions. When the astronauts deployed highly sensitive seismometers directly onto the lunar surface, they expected to hear a quiet, dead world. Instead, they recorded the terrifying reality of moonquakes. Unlike our planet, the Moon lacks a dynamic tectonic plate system and deep oceans. On Earth, when an earthquake strikes, the energy is relatively quickly dampened by the fractured tectonic plates and the massive bodies of water. The shaking usually lasts for a few seconds or at most a couple of minutes before the energy safely dissipates. But the moon's crust is rigid, cold, and incredibly dry. It behaves like a massive solid piece of metal. When a shallow moonquake triggers, often caused by the shrinking of the moon's interior or the massive gravitational tidal forces from Earth, the energy has nowhere to go. It doesn't dissipate. Instead, it reverberates. These shallow moonquakes can reach up to a magnitude of 5.5 on the Richter scale. On Earth, a 5.5 earthquake is frightening but manageable, mostly because it is over in 10 seconds. But on the Moon, the terrifying difference is the sheer, agonizing duration. The seismometers revealed that a single shallow moonquake can cause the entire lunar crust to violently ring like a struck bell for hours. Some recorded quakes lasted for over 2 straight hours of continuous, relentless shaking. Imagine sitting inside your fragile, pressurized habitat, already stressed by the violent thermal expansion of the Terminator line. Suddenly the ground begins to aggressively vibrate. You wait for it to stop, but it just keeps shaking minute after minute, hour after hour. The metallic walls of your habitat groan, the structural joints scream under the sustained mechanical fatigue, and the abrasive, razor-sharp dust on the floor begins to aggressively levitate from the continuous vibration. So you're locked inside a vibrating pressure cooker, completely surrounded by a fatal vacuum, listening to your only protection against the void slowly being shaken apart. There is absolutely nowhere to run, nowhere to evacuate to, and no solid ground to find comfort on. The moon doesn't just want to freeze you, boil you, or suffocate you. It actively wants to mechanically shake your shelter to pieces. Protecting yourself from the shaking ground seems completely impossible, because anchoring your base securely only guarantees the thermal shock will tear it apart. To truly understand why going underground is our only realistic option, we first have to clearly look at the invisible fire constantly raining down from above. You can theoretically engineer a suit to handle the abrasive dust, and you can build flexible joints to survive the brutal thermal shock. But there is one fundamental force of the lunar anatomy that you cannot simply build a physical wall against: the relentless bombardment of deep space radiation. On Earth, we are blissfully ignorant of the extreme radiological violence of the universe. Our planet generates a massive, incredibly powerful magnetic field known as the magnetosphere. This invisible shield stretches far out into space, aggressively deflecting the deadliest particles away from our fragile biology. The Moon, however, lost its active magnetic dynamo billions of years ago. It is completely magnetically dead, meaning the surface is stripped entirely naked, violently exposed to the full, unmitigated fury of the cosmos. There are 2 primary killers waiting for you in that silent sky. The first is solar particle events, or SPEs. These are massive, unpredictable bursts of highly charged protons violently ejected by solar flares. If you're out walking on the lunar surface and a severe solar storm hits, you would have mere minutes to find deep, heavily shielded cover. A standard spacesuit offers almost zero protection against an SPE. The intense radiation would pass straight through the fabric, tearing through your cellular walls and destroying your delicate bone marrow, leading to acute, fatal radiation sickness within days. It is a terrifying game of cosmic Russian roulette, where the sky can suddenly turn lethal without a single moment of warning. But even if the sun is perfectly quiet, you still have to face the Galactic Cosmic Rays. GCRs are not like normal radiation. They are incredibly dense, heavy atomic nuclei, like iron, stripped of their electrons and fired across the universe at nearly the speed of light by ancient supernovas. When a GCR hits a human body, it doesn't just pass cleanly through. It acts like a microscopic bowling ball, violently smashing into a rack of pins, physically shattering the intricate double helix of your DNA. The damage is so severe and chaotic that your cells cannot successfully repair it, guaranteeing aggressive terminal cancers for anyone who spends too much time outside. Or you can't hear them, you can't see them, and you can't feel them hitting you. You just slowly absorb the microscopic damage until your biology simply collapses. you might confidently think that building thick aluminum walls would easily protect you. But GCRs introduce a horrific secondary problem, known in physics as spallation. When a heavy high-energy cosmic ray violently strikes the dense aluminum atoms of your habitat's hull, it shatters the metal's atomic nucleus. This high-speed collision produces a shotgun blast of secondary radiation, aggressively spraying deadly neutrons and lighter particles directly into the cabin. In many terrifying cases, standing behind a thick metal shield is actually far more dangerous than standing outside, because the shield itself actively becomes a secondary radiation weapon. The sheer radiological hostility of the daytime surface forces planners to rely heavily on solar energy to power massive electromagnetic or heavy water-based radiation shields. But the Moon's orbital mechanics make this strategy incredibly desperate. Because the Moon is tidally locked to Earth and rotates incredibly slowly, a single lunar day takes about 29 Earth days to complete. That means when the sun finally sets on your habitat, you are suddenly plunged into a brutal, uninterrupted lunar night that lasts for 14 straight Earth days. Imagine the profound psychological and logistical despair of that sunset. For 336 continuous hours, your solar panels are completely dead. You are trapped in absolute freezing darkness at -130 degrees Celsius, entirely dependent on massive heavy battery banks or complex nuclear reactors that you somehow had to transport from Earth. If your power systems fail during that agonizing 2-week night, the plunging temperatures will freeze your life support systems solid in a matter of hours. You are locked in a desperate freezing siege, simply praying that your mechanical batteries outlast the longest, darkest night in the entire solar system. Because the surface is an unsolvable nightmare of radiation, thermal shock, abrasive dust, and 2-week-long freezing nights, engineers have collectively realized that humans can never permanently live above ground. The only viable long-term solution is to hide. We have to become cosmic moles and retreat deep into the lunar crust, utilizing massive geological structures known as lava tubes. Billions of years ago, when the Moon was still volcanically active, massive rivers of superheated magma flowed just beneath the surface. As the outer edges of the lava cooled and solidified, the molten rock inside continued to drain away, leaving behind colossal hollow subterranean tunnels. Some of these ancient lava tubes are truly staggering in scale, vast pitch-black caverns that are hundreds of meters wide and completely intact. By building our habitats deep inside these tubes, hundreds of feet below the surface, we would finally be protected. The massive ceiling of solid basalt rock provides an impenetrable, natural shield against the lethal galactic cosmic rays and the deadly micrometeorite impacts. Furthermore, deep inside the caves, the temperature stabilizes. You escape the violent 250-degree swings of the Terminator line and find a constant, highly manageable chill. Engineers are actively mapping these structures using orbital satellites, desperately looking for skylights, collapsed sections of the roof that allow physical entry into the abyss. But getting massive, delicate habitat modules down through a jagged, highly unstable sinkhole and assembling them in total darkness is a logistical nightmare with our current technology. Even if we succeed, from a human, psychological perspective, it is a claustrophobic nightmare of unparalleled proportions. You're trading the active, chaotic hostility of the surface for the dark, silent terror of a subterranean tomb. To survive, you must voluntarily seal yourself inside a pitch-black, jagged cave, entirely cut off from the Earth, the stars, and any natural light. The sheer isolation of that existence is enough to break the human mind. You would wake up every morning to artificial LED lights, surrounded by cold metal walls, knowing that thousands of tons of jagged, crushing rock hang just inches above your ceiling. The devastating psychological toll of never seeing a natural horizon, never feeling a breeze, and knowing that one single mechanical failure means a slow, dark death in an alien cave is an unbearable burden. If a fire breaks out inside a tightly sealed underground habitat, the toxic smoke cannot simply be vented outside without permanently losing your precious, irreplaceable oxygen supply. Every single breath you take, every drop of water you drink, and every lumen of light you see relies entirely on the relentless perfection of your mechanical systems buried in the absolute dark. There is no blue sky, no breeze, and absolutely no escape. You're perfectly safe from the universe, but only because you have buried yourself alive inside a dead rock. If the surface of the moon is a freezing, irradiated hell, the true catastrophe will begin when we finally try to build our cities. That catastrophic outcome only makes sense once you completely dispel the most deeply rooted cultural myths about this alien world. When we look up at the night sky, we project our own earthly assumptions onto the moon, completely misunderstanding the mechanics of its anatomy. The most famous of these misunderstandings is the persistent myth of the dark side of the moon. For generations, popular culture has taught you that there is a mysterious, permanently frozen half of the moon that never sees the sun. This is fundamentally completely false. The moon is tidally locked to our planet, meaning its rotational period perfectly matches its orbital period. Because of this mechanical synchronization, it always shows the exact same face to Earth. But the side facing away from us, the far side, receives just as much blistering sunlight as the near side. It has exactly the same brutal 14-day days and 14-day nights. The true horror of the far side has absolutely nothing to do with darkness. It has everything to do with absolute impenetrable isolation. Radio waves travel in perfectly straight lines. They cannot bend around massive planetary bodies. If you were forced to build a human habitat on the far side of the moon, the entire 3,400-kilometer solid mass of the lunar body would sit directly between you and Earth. You would have zero direct line-of-sight communication with mission control. You are completely severed from the human race. If a catastrophic fire breaks out in your life support system, or if a micrometeorite punctures your habitat module, you cannot simply call Houston for help. The radio silence is absolute. For more, you would be forced to rely entirely on a highly fragile, constantly moving network of orbital relay satellites. If a severe solar flare damages those satellites, or if a simple software glitch causes them to drift out of precise orbital alignment, you are entirely on your own. You would be completely stranded in the most unforgiving, irradiated environment imaginable, completely invisible and deaf to the home planet you left behind. The far side isn't just physically dark during its long night, it is terrifyingly, completely deaf to human cries for help. This sense of profound isolation is deeply rooted in the moon's internal anatomy. To understand why the surface is so uniquely hostile, you have to look deep underground, all the way down to the lunar core. The biggest myth about planets is that they are just big rocks. They are actually massive thermal engines. On Earth, thousands of kilometers beneath your feet, a massive ocean of liquid iron constantly churns and flows around a solid inner core. This violent convection acts as a colossal electromagnetic dynamo, generating the powerful magnetic shield that protects our biology from deep space radiation. The moon also has an iron core, but because the lunar body is roughly 1/4 the size of Earth, it possessed a vastly smaller thermal budget. It radiated its internal heat out into the freezing vacuum of space much too quickly. Billions of years ago, the churning liquid iron began to slow down. The thermal convection weakened, the dynamo sputtered, and eventually the internal engine simply froze solid. The moon suffered complete irreversible geological death. When you walk on the lunar surface, you are quite literally trying to survive on the frozen corpse of a celestial body. This dead, frozen core is the exact mechanical reason why the moon cannot generate a magnetic shield, leaving you entirely defenseless against the invisible fire of cosmic radiation. Without a churning core, there is no plate tectonics to recycle minerals, no volcanic outgassing to build a protective atmosphere, and absolutely no thermal energy to sustain a biosphere. You are fighting a desperate, losing war against the vacuum of the cosmos on a battlefield that permanently died billions of years ago. The moon has no life to give, only an infinite capacity to absorb destruction. But perhaps the most dangerous myth of all is the one that gives us the most false hope, the myth of lunar water. For decades, the scientific consensus firmly believed that the moon was bone dry. completely devoid of any volatile chemicals. But recent orbital missions discovered millions of tons of water ice hidden on the lunar surface. The media quickly portrayed this discovery as a miraculous salvation, assuming that future astronauts will simply melt the ice and easily drink pristine lunar water. But this romanticized vision completely ignores the brutal mechanical reality of where that water actually is. The water isn't sitting in convenient, accessible underground lakes or peacefully frozen on the open plains. It is permanently trapped inside massive deep craters exactly at the extreme lunar poles. Because the Moon's axis has almost zero tilt, the floors of these deep polar craters are formally known as permanently shadowed regions, or PSRs. The towering rims of the craters perfectly block the sun's rays. The floors of these craters haven't seen a single photon of direct sunlight in over 2 billion years. Because they are permanently shielded from the thermal energy of the sun, the temperature in these dark abysses drops to a staggering -240 degrees Celsius. That is significantly colder than the surface of Pluto. The water ice located there isn't clean. It is microscopically bound to the toxic razor-sharp regolith and heavily mixed with carbon monoxide, ammonia, and hydrogen sulfide. To actually harvest this miraculous water, you wouldn't just be digging a well. You would be forced to send heavy, highly specialized mining equipment down into a steep crater, into an abyss of absolute, unyielding darkness and unimaginable cold. The extreme freezing temperatures would instantly cause traditional lubricants to freeze solid, aggressively shattering the metal gears and snapping the robotic drill bits like dry twigs. Even if you somehow managed to extract the frozen toxic dirt without destroying your expensive rovers, the nightmare is only just beginning. You would then have to haul hundreds of tons of this incredibly abrasive material back up the steep, jagged crater walls into the sunlight. Once there, you must bake it in a complex high-energy chemical refinery, boiling off the toxic ammonia and sulfur just to painstakingly separate a few precious drops of usable water. It requires massive amounts of electrical power, massive amounts of heavy machinery, and constant, dangerous human supervision. The discovery of water on the Moon is not a convenient oasis for thirsty explorers. It is a brutal, energy-draining logistical nightmare. It perfectly highlights the ultimate cruelty of the lunar anatomy. Everything you desperately need to survive is technically there, but it is locked behind insurmountable physical and thermal barriers that actively want to destroy your machinery. The Moon dangles the promise of survival just out of reach, forcing you to expend massive amounts of energy and take catastrophic risks just to secure the most basic necessities of life. If massive dead cores and frozen polar craters weren't enough, it is deeply ironic that the true barrier to human survival is a microscopic physical paradox. The biggest misconception about lunar gravity is assuming it is a playful, harmless playground. When you watch the old archival footage of the Apollo astronauts gracefully bounding across the grey surface in slow motion, it looks genuinely fun. You see grown men effortlessly hopping around in heavy, bulky spacesuits, looking entirely weightless. Popular culture has ingrained this imagery into our collective minds, making us believe that reduced gravity is just a highly entertaining perk of space travel. But that joyful, bouncy footage hides a deeply insidious silent killer. The most terrifying aspect of the Moon isn't the radiation or the vacuum, it is the brutal physiological reality known to scientists as the gravity trap. To understand the sheer horror of this trap, you have to understand how perfectly your body's calibrated to Earth. You're a biological machine meticulously engineered over millions of years to fight against exactly 1 g of gravitational force. Every single time you take a step, every time you simply stand up, your bones and muscles are engaged in a relentless mechanical battle against the Earth's pull. This constant invisible resistance is precisely what keeps your skeletal structure dense and your cardiovascular system incredibly strong. When astronauts go to the International Space Station, they experience zero gravity. Without that constant resistance, their bodies rapidly begin to disintegrate. They aggressively lose up to 1% of their total bone density every single month, and their muscles violently atrophy despite spending hours exercising on specialized machines every day. Zero gravity is a known, well-documented medical disaster. But the Moon doesn't have zero gravity. It has exactly 1/6 of Earth's gravity, roughly 16.5%. And this is where the central paradox violently locks into place. 1/6 gravity is incredibly dangerous specifically because it is not zero. It is just strong enough to trick your central nervous system into thinking you are standing on solid ground, but it is fundamentally too weak to trigger the essential biological maintenance your body desperately needs to survive. The Moon provides a false, deadly sense of physical security. You don't feel like you're floating away, so you don't feel the urgent, pressing need to aggressively exercise like you would on a space station. You simply walk around feeling light and energetic, completely unaware that your skeletal system is slowly and silently dissolving inside your own body. The gravity trap doesn't just steal the calcium from your bones, it actively destroys your cardiovascular system. Your heart is a massive, incredibly powerful muscle, specifically designed to pump heavy blood uphill, aggressively fighting Earth's gravity just to get oxygen to your brain. When you relocate to the Moon, your heart suddenly finds itself out of a job. Pumping blood in 1/6 gravity requires almost zero effort. Because biological systems are relentlessly efficient, your body immediately recognizes this lack of resistance and begins to dismantle the heart muscle. The cardiac tissue physically shrinks. The walls of your heart become dangerously thin and terrifyingly weak. On Earth, if you suddenly stand up, your autonomic nervous system instantly tightens your blood vessels to maintain blood pressure and prevent you from passing out. But on the Moon, this critical reflex completely atrophies. Your blood vessels become lazy and unresponsive. If you ever found yourself in a sudden emergency requiring a massive, rapid physical effort, like running to an airlock or manually sealing a breached bulkhead, your weakened cardiovascular system simply wouldn't be able to deliver the necessary oxygen. You would rapidly lose consciousness precisely when you need your strength the most. Furthermore, because there isn't enough gravity firmly pulling the fluids down into your legs, a massive volume of blood and interstitial fluid aggressively rushes up into your torso and your skull. Your body was never designed to handle this sustained upward fluid shift. The relentless, intense pressure inside your skull physically begins to crush the back of your eyeballs. This triggers a horrific, currently incurable medical condition known as spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome, or SANS. The optic nerve aggressively swells, the back of the eye physically flattens, and your vision slowly, permanently degrades. You're slowly going blind, and your heart is quietly withering away inside your chest, all while you feel perfectly fine and energetically bounce across the regolith. This creates a terrifying, irreversible physiological event horizon. If you stay on the Moon for too long, your bone density drops below the critical fracture threshold, and your heart muscle degrades past the point of no return. You're now a permanent prisoner of the lunar environment. Your body fundamentally belongs to the Moon. If you ever tried to board a rocket and endure the massive G-forces of launch, followed by the crushing, inescapable force of 1G during re-entry into Earth's atmosphere, the results would be immediately fatal. The sudden return of Earth's heavy gravity would instantly shatter your weakened spine, completely crush your severely decalcified ribs, and cause your atrophied heart to catastrophically fail under the massive unfamiliar gravitational load. You can never go home. The Moon doesn't actively murder you with a sudden explosion, it passively traps you in a slow, irreversible decay, holding you hostage until you simply cannot survive anywhere else in the universe. But the true existential horror of the 1/6 gravity trap goes far beyond the survival of individual astronauts. If humanity actually wants to establish a permanent multi-generational colony on the lunar surface, people will eventually have to reproduce. And this is where the biological nightmare reaches its absolute terrifying peak. Human reproduction is not just a chemical process, it is a profoundly mechanical one. When a single human cell divides during mitosis, it relies on a complex microscopic physical scaffold called the mitotic spindle. Biologists have discovered that these delicate microscopic fibers heavily rely on the downward pull of Earth's gravity to properly align and separate the chromosomes. In the reduced gravity of the Moon, there is a very high, mathematically terrifying probability that these cellular scaffolds will fail to align correctly. If the cells cannot successfully divide, early embryonic development becomes completely impossible. But even if an embryo somehow survived the initial cellular divisions, the nightmare only deepens. The development of a human fetus heavily depends on the mechanical stress of gravity to properly organize the internal organs, strictly define the cardiovascular layout, and securely build the spinal column. Without the relentless, heavy downward pull of 1G, a developing human spine might not fuse correctly, and the heart might not develop the muscular thickness required to sustain life. We simply do not know if a human being can successfully gestate, be born, and grow to adulthood in 1/6 gravity. The most highly educated medical guess right now is a terrifying no. The brutal reality is that a lunar colony might biologically end in a single generation. The environment doesn't just aggressively destroy the adults who travel there, it actively mechanically prevents the next generation from even existing. You're completely isolated in a world that fundamentally rejects the very biological mechanics of human life at a microscopic, cellular level. And yet, gravity is only the first inescapable trap. To truly understand why the entire lunar ecosystem completely rejects you, we first have to look at the machines meant to save you. We inherently believe that human engineering can overcome any natural obstacle. We think that if an environment is hostile, we just need to build better, smarter, and stronger tools. But the Moon's anatomy is not just hostile, it is deeply, fundamentally paradoxical. Every single mechanical solution we attempt to implement immediately triggers a completely new and vastly more lethal problem. The most immediate example of this terrifying catch-22 is the dust paradox. We know the lunar regolith is composed of jagged electrostatically charged shards of glass that tear apart lung tissue and destroy rubber seals. The obvious intuitive solution is to simply brush it off your spacesuit before you enter the habitat's airlock. But the physical reality of the vacuum completely betrays you. Because the dust is highly charged by solar radiation, it clings to the spacesuit fabric. When an astronaut takes a stiff nylon brush and vigorously scrubs the material to clean it, that mechanical friction actively generates more static electricity. The harder you try to clean the suit, the stronger the electrostatic bond becomes, and the deeper the microscopic glass hooks grind into the complex woven fibers. The very act of cleaning actively accelerates the destruction of your life-saving equipment. You are trapped in an unsolvable loop where basic maintenance guarantees catastrophic failure. You cannot keep the habitat clean, meaning it is only a matter of time before the glass infiltrates your air supply, your water filtration systems, and the delicate electronics of your life support computers. A single short circuit caused by this highly conductive dust could instantly kill the entire crew while they sleep. If the dust paradox threatens your air, the water paradox completely destroys your long-term logistics. As we explored earlier, there are millions of tons of water ice trapped in the permanently shadowed regions at the lunar poles. On paper, this is a miraculous lifeline. But in physical reality, the pursuit of that water is a deadly trap. To harvest it, you must send complex mining machinery into an abyss that rests at -240 degrees Celsius. At that extreme temperature, steel becomes as brittle as cheap glass, and standard mechanical lubricants freeze into solid rock. To prevent your multi-million-dollar mining rovers from instantly dying in the dark, you have to equip them with massive heavy internal heaters. To power those heaters, you need colossal amounts of electricity. But there is absolutely no sunlight in the crater. This means you must build massive solar arrays on the high illuminated rims of the crater and physically beam the power down using high-energy lasers or heavy kilometer-long physical cables. You must account for the immense energy required to keep the machines alive, drill into the rock-hard, frozen regolith, haul the toxic dirt up the steep walls, and refine it. When you calculate all these operational costs, the thermodynamic equation completely collapses. So, you're spending significantly more energy and resources to extract the water than the water is actually worth. It is an economic and thermodynamic black hole. The water is technically there, but the moon's brutal geometry ensures that trying to drink it will quickly bankrupt your colony's power grid. You're effectively trapped in a desert where the only oasis is surrounded by landmines and requires you to burn more water just to reach it than you will ever bring back. It is a thermodynamic illusion that tricks planners into believing the moon is habitable, when in reality it is just dangling an impossible carrot. This brings us to the ultimate inescapable nightmare, the night and power paradox. To survive the brutal, freezing 14-day lunar night, and to power those massive mining operations, you need an incredible amount of continuous electricity. Solar panels are entirely useless for 336 hours at a time. Chemical batteries capable of powering an entire underground colony for 2 weeks are astronomically heavy. Launching them from Earth would cost billions of dollars and require dozens of Starship launches just for the batteries alone. The only mathematically viable solution for a permanent colony is a nuclear fission reactor, but placing a nuclear reactor on the moon triggers a terrifying thermodynamic crisis. Nuclear reactors generate massive amounts of electricity, but they also generate an immense amount of deadly waste heat. On Earth, we easily cool our reactors using basic convection. We simply pump millions of gallons of cold ocean water or ambient air over the heated components, and the environment carries the heat away. But the moon has absolutely no air and no oceans. It is a hard vacuum. A vacuum is a perfect thermal insulator. It does not conduct heat. Neared puzzle of hostility, where every single survival strategy actively turns against you. You try to protect yourself from the deadly cosmic radiation by hiding deep underground in a lava tube, but doing so forces you to rely entirely on complex machinery that you cannot safely power without risking a nuclear meltdown. You try to secure a stable water supply, but the massive process drains the very energy you need to keep your habitat from freezing solid during the 14-day night. You try to meticulously clean the toxic, razor-sharp dust off your suit to protect your fragile lungs, but the friction just destroys your primary pressure seal, risking instant exposure to the vacuum. And underneath all of these terrifying immediate mechanical threats, the fundamental force of gravity is silently, continuously dissolving your bone density and shrinking your cardiovascular muscle. Even if you miraculously solve the abrasive dust, perfectly balance the vacuum nuclear reactor, and successfully mine the polar craters, you still cannot win. The 1/6 gravity ensures that your body will quietly decay until you are a prisoner forever. There is no combination of technology, no brilliant engineering workaround, and no amount of sheer human willpower that can alter the microscopic and macroscopic physics of this environment. The stark, undeniable reality is that the moon was never meant for us. The universe has drawn a hard, unforgiving line in the cosmic sand, proving exactly why living on it is a physiological death trap. But just when you finally accept the moon's terrifying hostility, an even more mind-bending puzzle about the sheer scale of the cosmos emerges. That terrifying mechanical puzzle only makes sense once you step back, completely ignore the microscopic details, and look at the staggering mathematical reality of the physical void between us. The human brain is an incredible evolutionary tool, but it is fundamentally hardwired to only understand terrestrial distances. We evolved to understand the distance to the next valley, the width of a river, or the height of a mountain. We are completely unequipped to mentally process the sheer, terrifying scale of cosmic architecture. This cognitive limitation is exactly why we completely misunderstand the true nature of lunar isolation. When you walk outside on a clear night and look up at a full moon, it feels remarkably close. It dominates the sky. It feels like it is just sitting right on the edge of our atmosphere, almost like a distant continent or a remote island just waiting to be sailed to. Science fiction movies and popular media constantly reinforce this illusion, portraying the moon as a convenient suburb of Earth, just a quick rocket ride away. But this feeling of proximity is a massive, fatal optical illusion. Because space is a perfect vacuum, there is absolutely no atmospheric haze to provide your eyes with a sense of depth perception. You're looking at a massive 3,400 kilometer wide sphere of rock shining brilliantly against a pitch-black background, and your brain completely miscalculates its position. The physical reality is that the Moon is located 384,400 kilometers away from Earth. That number is so astronomically large that the human mind simply glazes over it. To put that terrifying distance into physical perspective, imagine gathering every other planet in our solar system. You could take Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus and Neptune and line them up perfectly edge to edge. They would easily fit in the empty void between Earth and the Moon. Even after fitting all those massive gas giants and rocky worlds into that gap, you would still have several thousand kilometers of empty space left over. The void separating us from the Moon is not a small gap. It is a profound, incomprehensibly massive chasm of absolute nothingness. This sheer volume of empty space acts as a massive logistical barrier. It requires an astronomical amount of rocket fuel just to launch a single kilogram of payload out of Earth's deep gravity well and push it across that massive distance. This means that every single spare part, every medical bandage and every drop of emergency water is incredibly expensive and extremely rare. So you cannot simply order a replacement part from a factory. You must wait months for the orbital mechanics to align for a resupply mission, assuming the colony can even afford the launch. When you travel to the lunar surface, you're not just leaving home. You're crossing an ocean of dead space so vast that it can swallow the rest of the solar system whole. This staggering distance introduces a hard, unbreakable physical barrier to human survival, the speed of light limit. In our modern terrestrial lives, we are completely accustomed to instant communication. We can video chat with someone on the exact opposite side of the planet with practically zero latency. But the universe imposes a strict speed limit on electromagnetic radiation. Radio waves travel exactly at the speed of light, roughly 300,000 kilometers per second. Because the Moon is so incredibly far away, it takes a radio signal a full 1.28 seconds just to cross the void and reach the Earth. If you're standing on the lunar surface and you ask a mission control a question, it takes 1.28 seconds for your voice to reach their headsets. It takes them time to process it, and then another 1.28 seconds for their answer to travel back to you. The absolute minimum possible delay in any conversation is over 2.5 seconds. In a casual conversation, a 2.5 second ping is just slightly annoying. But in a high-stakes life-or-death spaceflight emergency, that delay is absolutely fatal. Imagine you're outside in your spacesuit operating a heavy robotic mining vehicle near the edge of a deep crater. Suddenly a structural bracket snaps and the machine begins to tilt. You immediately scream into your radio for mission control to override the safety protocols. But by the time your frantic voice actually reaches the speakers in Houston, you have already been falling into the abyss for over a second. If mission control tries to send an emergency abort command to your rover, it takes another second for that digital command to arrive. In the brutally fast physics of mechanical failure, 3 seconds is an eternity. You're fundamentally disconnected from the human timeline. You are living slightly in the past, completely severed from the real-time safety net of human civilization. If something goes wrong, you will always be dead before anyone on Earth even realizes you are in danger. This means that robotics and automation, which are often touted as the ultimate solution for lunar colonization, are severely compromised. You cannot have a surgeon in New York remotely operating a robotic scalpel on a patient located on the Moon. The transmission delay would cause the surgeon to accidentally slice through a major artery before they even saw the tissue move on their monitor. Every single complex action, every delicate repair, and every critical medical procedure must be performed manually by the isolated crew, using whatever limited tools and raw materials they happen to have inside their sealed cave. This terrifying temporal disconnect is only the beginning of the logistical nightmare. The sheer scale of the Earth-Moon distance makes physical rescue an absolute, undeniable mathematical impossibility. The general public often falsely equates a lunar colony with the International Space Station. The ISS is located in low Earth orbit, which is only about 400 kilometers above the surface of the planet. While it is technically in space, it is essentially hugging the Earth's upper atmosphere. If a catastrophic fire breaks out on the ISS, the crew has an immediate escape route. If an astronaut suffers a sudden severe medical emergency like a heart attack, they can quickly climb into a docked Soyuz capsule. They simply detach from the station and perform an emergency re-entry. Within just a few hours, they can be safely on the ground, breathing fresh air and receiving advanced medical care in a state-of-the-art hospital. The Moon does not offer that luxury. It is roughly 1,000 times further away than the International Space Station. There is no quick escape pod. You cannot simply hit a panic button and fall back to Earth. According to the unforgiving laws of orbital mechanics, a minimum energy return trajectory from the Moon to the Earth takes a minimum of 3 solid days of continuous travel. That is 72 agonizing hours trapped inside a small, freezing metal capsule, violently hurtling through the irradiated vacuum of deep space. If your spacesuit suffers a microscopic puncture from the abrasive lunar dust, you will suffer explosive decompression and boil alive in seconds. There is no rescue for that. If the massive thermal shock of the Terminator line finally shatters the pressure seals of your habitat module, the entire crew will suffocate in minutes. There is no rescue for that. Even if you suffer a relatively mundane medical emergency, like a severe allergic reaction, a compound bone fracture from a fall, or internal bleeding from the gravity trap, you are completely doomed. The absolute best-case scenario is enduring 3 days of excruciating pain and zero-gravity medical care with extremely limited supplies. You must then desperately hope you survive the brutal high-G re-entry forces when you finally hit the Earth's atmosphere. The psychological realization that you are completely, utterly beyond the reach of any human rescue mission creates a suffocating aura of vulnerability. You are a biological hostage to the void, and this profound vulnerability eventually leads to the most devastating psychological trauma of the lunar experience. When the Apollo astronauts first flew around the Moon, they captured a famous photograph known as Earthrise. They described seeing the bright blue and white marble of our planet rising over the dead grey lunar horizon. Psychologists coined the term overview effect to describe the profound, almost spiritual cognitive shift that occurs when an astronaut sees the Earth from space. They suddenly realize how beautiful, fragile, and deeply interconnected our biosphere really is. But for a permanent colonist, permanently trapped in a highly dangerous, constantly decaying mechanical habitat, the overview effect rapidly mutates into a horrific psychological condition known as the isolation effect. You step outside, clad in a bulky, restrictive spacesuit that constantly rubs against your skin. You look up into the pitch-black sky and you see the Earth. It is a stunning, brilliant sapphire suspended in an endless ocean of absolute darkness. You can clearly see the white swirls of the clouds, the deep blue of the Pacific Ocean, and the brown continents. You know with absolute certainty that every single drop of liquid water, every green blade of grass, every warm breeze, and every human being you have ever loved is entirely contained on that tiny distant sphere. And then you lift your arm, extend your thumb, and you completely cover it up. With a single gesture, you eclipse the entirety of human history and biological existence. You realize that the beautiful blue sphere is the only functional lifeboat in a violently hostile, aggressive universe. It is the only place specifically designed by billions of years of evolution to keep you alive. And you have voluntarily abandoned it. You have chosen to leave the lifeboat and plunge into a freezing, irradiated desert. The psychological weight of that visual isolation is enough to cause severe, permanent psychological breakdown. Every time you look at the Earth, you're not filled with spiritual wonder, you're filled with a crushing, paralyzing homesickness and the terrifying realization of your own astronomical mistake. As you stand there staring at the distant Earth, the true macro-scale violence of the solar system finally comes into sharp, terrifying focus. You realize that out here in the deep void, you're completely stripped of the Earth's massive atmospheric armor. For billions of years, the Earth has been protected by a thick blanket of gas that aggressively burns up incoming cosmic debris. The Moon has no such protection. It is a naked, battered shield that has been absorbing the brutal impact of the cosmos since the dawn of the solar system. When you look closely at the lunar surface, you aren't just looking at rocks, you are looking at the scars of a relentless, never-ending cosmic bombardment. The entire surface is heavily pockmarked with millions of overlapping craters, ranging from microscopic dents to massive impact basins hundreds of kilometers wide. Because there is no atmosphere to slow them down, absolutely everything that crosses the moon's orbit hits the ground at full cosmic velocity. We are not just talking about massive extinction-level asteroids. The true terror lies in the microscopic and pebble-sized debris. Countless micrometeorites, tiny flakes of rock and metal shed by passing comets, are constantly raining down from the sky. They are traveling at speeds exceeding 70,000 kilometers per hour. At that incredible velocity, a tiny piece of rock the size of a grain of sand carries the kinetic energy of a high-caliber sniper bullet. On Earth, these particles harmlessly burn up as shooting stars high in the mesosphere. On the Moon, they slam directly into the regolith in complete silence. You're constantly living in the crosshairs of an invisible, unpredictable cosmic firing squad. There is absolutely no way to predict when or where a micrometeorite will strike. A silent, invisible bullet could shatter the glass visor of your helmet at any moment, instantly exposing your boiling eyes to the hard vacuum. It could puncture the pressurized hull of your rover while you're driving, or shatter the critical thermal cooling loops of your nuclear reactor. The sky is quite literally falling every single second of every single day, and you have absolutely no warning system. You're forced to live in a perpetual state of hypervigilance, knowing that the universe is actively throwing rocks at your fragile glass house. And yet, looking at the Earth is a luxury most colonists will never survive long enough to experience. The biggest misconception about our current space programs is assuming they have somehow engineered their way around these fundamental laws of physics. When you look at the glossy, high-definition promotional materials for the upcoming lunar missions, you're not looking at scientific reality, you're looking at a highly curated, multi-billion-dollar marketing illusion. To understand the deeply tragic irony of our modern return to the Moon, we must critically examine a profound disconnect. We must look closely at what space agencies sell to the public versus what the universe is actually prepared to do to the astronauts. Take a close look at the official computer-generated renders for NASA's Artemis program. The imagery is relentlessly optimistic and beautifully pristine. You see brave astronauts standing proudly on the lunar surface, clad in brilliant, spotless white spacesuits. They are effortlessly setting up scientific equipment, casually driving rovers across the grey plains, and looking out at the horizon with a sense of romanticized triumph. But knowing what you now know about the lunar anatomy, these images border on the absurd. They completely ignore the microscopic reality of the regolith. Within minutes of stepping outside, those pristine white suits will be permanently stained a dark, abrasive grey. NASA recently unveiled the prototype for their new lunar spacesuits, designed by private contractors. They look sleek, modern, and highly articulated, promising greater mobility than the stiff, bulky suits worn by Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. The designers proudly showcase the advanced life support backpacks and the flexible joint bearings. But this engineering marvel fundamentally ignores the abrasive reality of the lunar dust. Those complex, flexible joints are incredibly vulnerable. In a laboratory on Earth, they work perfectly. But on the Moon, the electrostatically charged, razor-sharp regolith will instantly migrate into those tiny mechanical crevices. Within a few days of active use, the fine silica will aggressively grind down the delicate bearings, turning that high-tech mobility suit into a rigid, leaking coffin. The designers are building equipment for an idealized environment that simply does not exist. Furthermore, the renders don't show the astronauts desperately struggling to decontaminate their airlocks, knowing that a single mistake means inhaling razor-sharp silica. They don't show the terrifying, invisible bombardment of galactic cosmic rays silently passing right through those sleek white helmets, aggressively shattering the astronauts' DNA. The public relations machine of the modern space industry has successfully sterilized the Moon, transforming a highly radioactive, deeply hostile vacuum into a cheerful, challenging camping trip. It is a dangerous, intoxicating hubris, This intoxicating hubris is currently driving an aggressive, high-stakes geopolitical conflict known as the New Space Race. The media constantly frames this as a dramatic terrestrial battle between the United States and China. Every time China's Chang'e missions successfully land a robotic probe or return a sample of lunar dirt, Western politicians panic about losing the strategic high ground. Both superpowers are now desperately racing to establish the first permanent crewed base at the lunar South Pole. They are fiercely competing for control over those frozen, toxic, permanently shadowed regions, desperate to claim the water ice for themselves. But this entire geopolitical framing is a tragic, ironic joke. The media acts as if the United States and China are fighting each other for a highly valuable prize. In reality, they are aggressively racing each other to build a permanent camp inside an active meat grinder. The moon doesn't care about terrestrial politics, national borders, or the color of the flag planted in its dust. The real enemy of the Artemis program isn't the Chinese Space Agency, and the real enemy of the Chang'e program isn't NASA. The true absolute enemy is the 1/6 gravity that will silently rot the bones of whichever nation's astronauts arrive first. It is a profound, almost comical tragedy. The two most powerful nations on Earth are spending trillions of dollars and risking their best minds. They are fiercely competing to see who gets the privilege of experiencing catastrophic thermal failure, radiation sickness, and fatal cardiovascular atrophy first. But perhaps the most egregious display of human arrogance comes from the private sector. We have entered the era of the billionaire space barons, figures like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, who casually talk about democratizing space and making humanity a multiplanetary species. They confidently present massive stainless steel rockets and outline bold visions of sprawling lunar cities and bustling orbital economies. In their highly publicized keynote presentations, the moon is rarely treated as a lethal threat. Instead, it is casually dismissed as a convenient stepping stone, a mere gas station on the grand highway to Mars. This narrative is the absolute peak of modern technological hubris. It assumes that human biology is just another engineering variable that can be easily patched or upgraded with a software update. The billionaires focus entirely on the mechanics of transportation, building bigger rockets, lowering the cost per kilogram to orbit, and designing reusable boosters. And they are admittedly brilliant at that. But getting to the moon was never the impossible part. The Apollo program proved we could physically transport humans across the void 60 years ago. The impossible part is surviving the environment once you actually open the airlock. The rhetoric of space commercialization relies on the dangerous assumption that the moon is just a harsher version of Antarctica or the deep ocean, a difficult frontier that can be conquered with enough money and thick enough walls. But Antarctica has 1 g of gravity. The deep ocean has a protective magnetic field. If a research station in Antarctica fails, the scientists can still breathe the air outside while they wait for rescue. The moon offers zero margins for error. The concept of lunar tourism is a macabre fantasy. Imagine paying millions of dollars to spend 2 weeks locked inside a windowless subterranean lava tube, aggressively breathing recycled air, while your skeletal system rapidly decalcifies and the constant threat of a solar flare meltdown hangs over your head. It is not an adventure, it is a highly expensive, extremely dangerous form of physiological torture. You cannot simply commercialize a physiological death trap. You cannot build a bustling tourist economy in an environment where a single micrometeorite puncture means boiling alive in your own skin. The billionaire narrative completely ignores the terrifying, incurable reality of spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome. So, it brushes over the fact that a lunar colony might biologically end in a single generation because the mitotic spindles in human cells cannot properly align in 1/6 gravity. They treat the colonization of the moon as an inevitable, glorious destiny, entirely ignoring the fact that the universe has actively engineered the lunar surface to brutally reject us at both the macro and the microscopic level. This is the tragic irony of our entire relationship with the moon. Since the dawn of human civilization, we have looked up at that glowing orb in the night sky and projected our deepest desires onto it. Ancient cultures worshipped it as a deity. Early astronomers dreamed it was a sister Earth, covered in lush forests and deep oceans. Even during the height of the Cold War Apollo missions, we viewed it as the ultimate proving ground for human courage and technological supremacy. And today we view it as a strategic military asset and a lucrative commercial real estate venture. But the moon has never been any of those things. It is simply a dead, frozen, irradiated rock that lost its internal heat billions of years ago. We are violently forcing our romanticized narratives onto a celestial body that is entirely indifferent to our existence. The sheer amount of intellectual capital, raw material, and human life we are willing to risk just to maintain a fragile, terrifyingly vulnerable foothold in that vacuum is staggering. We are willingly walking into the most perfectly designed trap in the solar system, blinded by our own pride and an outdated sense of manifest destiny. We are so obsessed with the question of whether or not we can build a base on the moon that we have completely ignored the horrifying reality of what happens to the human body after we successfully build it. The machines might survive, the rockets might land gracefully, and the cameras might broadcast in stunning 4K resolution, but the fragile, fleshy biology of the human beings inside those machines will inevitably, mathematically collapse. The modern space race seems completely unsolvable, because winning the geopolitical battle only guarantees you will lose the biological war against the moon. That guaranteed biological failure only makes sense once you realize how little we actually know about the moon's deepest secrets. You might speak with incredible confidence about the lunar environment, citing precise thermal calculations and gravity percentages as if you have perfectly mapped every single threat. But the terrifying reality is that our current scientific models are built on a razor-thin foundation of data collected over half a century ago. We have identified the immediate obvious killers, but you are completely blind to the long-term horrors waiting in the dark. The most glaring and terrifying open question is the long-term biological consequence of multi-generational exposure. As we discussed, we strongly suspect that fetal development in 1/6 gravity is fundamentally impossible. But what if, through some miracle of advanced medical intervention, a human child is actually born in a lunar habitat? We have absolutely zero data on how a human brain wires itself without the constant heavy downward vector of Earth's gravity. The vestibular system, the delicate network of fluid-filled canals inside your inner ear that controls physical balance and spatial awareness, evolved strictly under 1G. Without that specific mechanical cue, a lunar-born child might suffer from severe, permanent, and agonizing vertigo. Their brain might fundamentally misinterpret sensory input, leading to a lifetime of crippling neurological dysfunction. Furthermore, how will human DNA express itself after decades of continuous exposure to the secondary spallation radiation, bouncing around inside a lava tube? Biologists quietly fear unprecedented epigenetic mutations. We might accidentally engineer a heavily deformed, suffering offshoot of humanity. They would be permanently trapped in an environment they can never leave, because their fragile bones would instantly shatter under the weight of Earth's atmosphere. Furthermore, we do not know how your immune system will respond to a completely sterile environment devoid of natural terrestrial bacteria. Without a healthy microbiome continuously challenged by earthly pathogens, a colonist's immune system might completely collapse, leaving you highly vulnerable to even the mildest opportunistic infections. Equally terrifying is the completely unknown psychological breaking point of the human mind. We have isolated humans in submarines and Antarctic research stations for months at a time, but those people always knew they were eventually going home. They could always breathe the air outside if they absolutely had to. We have never subjected a human being to the absolute existential permanence of lunar isolation, where even looking at a photograph of a green forest might trigger a devastating, paralyzing, depressive episode. What happens to your psyche when it is permanently severed from the biosphere? The human brain requires natural sunlight, the chaotic sound of wind, and the smell of rain to properly regulate essential neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine. Psychiatrists have no idea how your mind will cope with spending years locked inside a windowless metal tube, living in a perpetual agonizing state of hypervigilance. When every single breath relies on a spinning fan, and every moment could be violently interrupted by a silent micrometeorite strike, the chronic stress hormone cortisol will flood your brain continuously. It is highly probable that this will lead to a new extreme form of psychotic breakdown, a severe lunar madness. The ultimate fear of every mission planner is a catastrophic psychological break. What happens when a completely broken, violently psychotic colonist simply decides to walk over and manually open the primary airlock? They could instantly kill the entire crew in a single moment of absolute despair. And finally, there are the terrifying geological unknowns hiding deep beneath the lunar surface. You might boldly assume that the moon is a completely dead, static rock. But our entire understanding of the lunar interior relies heavily on a tiny handful of Apollo seismometers that were permanently turned off in the 1970s. We know shockingly little about the deep mantle. What if the moon isn't as geologically dead as we desperately want to believe? There is a very real, terrifying possibility of dormant, highly pressurized pockets of toxic volcanic gases trapped deep within the lunar crust. As you drill into the ancient lava tubes to build your sprawling subterranean cities, the massive mechanical vibrations could easily disturb these deep, unstable pockets. You could inadvertently trigger a catastrophic release of toxic, corrosive gas directly into the enclosed habitat, silently poisoning the entire colony while they sleep. We are confidently building our future on a foundation of massive, terrifying assumptions, blindly hoping that the darkest corners of the moon won't aggressively fight back. But just when you accept these terrifying unknowns, the final, inescapable truth about our cosmic future violently emerges. To truly understand why the universe is so relentlessly hostile, we first have to look closely at the one place that isn't. Throughout this entire journey, we have meticulously broken down the terrifying physics, the toxic chemistry, and the lethal radiation of the lunar surface. But the ultimate lesson of the moon is not about space at all. The ultimate lesson of the moon is about the Earth. We spend our entire terrestrial lives completely taking our planet for granted. We complain about rainy days, completely forgetting that liquid water falling from the sky is a thermodynamic miracle that requires a perfectly balanced atmosphere. We complain about gravity, completely ignoring the fact that this exact, heavy downward vector is the only thing keeping our bones from turning to chalk and our hearts from shrinking into useless muscle. Deep beneath our feet, a massive ocean of molten iron is spinning, generating an immense, invisible magnetic shield that actively deflects the deadly solar wind and galactic cosmic rays. Without that spinning core, our atmosphere would be stripped away in a geological blink of an eye. The Earth is not just a rock that we happen to live on. It is a massive, incredibly complex biological superorganism. Everything from the precise density of the air to the specific wavelength of sunlight filtering through the ozone layer has been perfectly tuned over billions of years of violent evolution to keep you alive. We are intimately, deeply connected to this specific planetary machinery. We are just tiny, fragile cells operating inside a much larger living system. We were never designed to exist outside of it. This is why the fantasy of lunar colonization is ultimately a tragic delusion. The moon's true cosmic purpose was never to serve as a military base, a commercial mining operation, or a convenient stepping stone for billionaires trying to reach Mars. Its true purpose is to serve as a massive, silent cosmic mirror. It hangs in the night sky, beautifully illuminated to show us exactly what a completely dead universe looks like. When you look at the moon, you are looking at a stark, unforgiving warning about the incredible fragility of life. It physically demonstrates what happens to a world when its internal magnetic engine dies, its oceans freeze and evaporate, and it is left completely exposed to the brutal, macro-scale violence of the cosmos. It is a frozen corpse, preserved in a perfect vacuum, serving as a permanent monument to the incredible rarity of our own existence. It demands that we look back at our own oceans and forests with a profound sense of desperate gratitude, rather than looking at the stars with an arrogant sense of conquest. There is a deep, profound melancholy in finally accepting our biological boundaries. Whoa, we are fundamentally tethered to this blue marble, bound by an invisible umbilical cord of gravity and atmospheric pressure, that we can never truly sever. Every strand of our DNA, the intricate fluid dynamics of our cardiovascular system, the complex structure of our eyes, and the delicate balance of our minds were all forged in the unyielding furnace of Earth's physical laws. We are, in the most literal biological sense of the word, Earthlings. Attempting to permanently sever that connection doesn't elevate us, it simply destroys us at a cellular level. Accepting this truth is not a defeat of human ingenuity or a failure of our exploratory spirit. It is simply the ultimate realization of our true place in the cosmos. We are deeply fortunate prisoners in a violently hostile universe, floating on the only lifeboat that actually works. We finally understand what the moon really is, and why living on it is a physiological death trap. Now that you finally know the terrifying truth, the only remaining question is how you will look at the sky tonight. The moon is not a prize waiting to be conquered. It is a massive, irradiated warning sign hanging right outside our window, permanently reminding us how lucky we are to be inside. And you? Where in the world are you watching the sky from tonight, and what can you see above your roof? Tell us in the comments, along with the time where you are. If you love wandering through the night sky, subscribe to the channel. That's what keeps this work going. The next episode of The Edges of the Sky takes us to the spaceship that must be Earth, a massive, fragile vessel hurtling through